the norms around doing so, and recognise reality by teaching them how to be safe. Next slide, please. The digital world doesn't only change how young people experience sexuality, it changes how they experience themselves. That's not to say they don't have agency in doing so, but this agency is shaped by some pretty strong external forces. Online life allows for the creation of identities that can feel detached from the body. Through avatars, filters, and curated profiles, teenagers can create different versions of themselves. These are often quite separate from who they are in the real world, and they can encourage a sense of separation between mind and body. The teenage years are a time to try to seek identity, but the fragmentation of identities online can be destabilizing. If my worth is measured in likes or follows, if my identity is judged through a screen, then my real embodied self can start to feel inadequate or even irrelevant. For girls and young women, this carries particular risks. The online environment places them under relentless scrutiny. They learn quickly that their bodies are judged and rated. Porn creates an unpleasant model of what future relationships may look like, and all this, particularly alongside the discomfort of puberty, can mean that some girls and young women look for ways to distance themselves from the realities of their sex. When girls learn that their value lies in how convincingly they can perform a role for others, whether as a sexual object or as a flawless online avatar, their ability to build a confident, integrated sense of self is undermined. Next slide, please. This identity fragmentation and flight from womanhood can link into the online spread of eating disorders, self-harm, and gender distress, all of which share a sense of physical discomfort. Social media doesn't just transmit ideas, it can transmit emotions and behaviours. There's increasing evidence that symptoms of mental ill health and even physical ill health, for example, the spread of TikTok tics during the pandemic, can be transmitted online. Online communities can provide girls and young women with support, but they can also be harmful. We see this most starkly with eating disorders. Platforms like TikTok and Instagram are filled with videos that, on the surface, claim to raise awareness about anorexia. Yet the same videos often detail calorie counts or display the extremes of the illness in ways that vulnerable viewers may find aspirational. Instead of deterring disordered eating, this kind of content can draw teenagers further in. The same pattern is evident with self-harm. A teenager who encounters one post about cutting or about suicidal feelings can quickly be swept into a torrent of material that reinforces despair. The nature of algorithms means that people are often served up more of the content they choose to watch. The more harmful content they view, the more enters their feed, and the more likely they are to create content that pulls other people into similar ways of thinking. Researchers have described this as mass social media-induced illness, or clusters of harmful emotions and behaviours that spread through digital networks. In other cases, psychological symptoms may in fact reflect a need for recognition and care, a phenomenon that's been termed Munchausen's by internet. What connects the points at the top of the slide is where vulnerability meets contagion, which tends to happen with the girls and young women experiencing the worst forms of pressure around body and image and identity. That's not to say, of course, that vulnerability is universal. The presence of online harms depend on the use. For example, whether you're pursuing an online hobby or endlessly scrolling other people's feeds, and the user, those who have less in the way of real-world interests and who find it harder to put down their screens are likely to be more vulnerable than others. The internet isn't about to disappear, and we need to work out how best to balance its harms with potential benefits. So supporting real-world relationships, finding new communities, and developing skills and interests. Next slide, thank you. My view is that we need pragmatism rather than panic when thinking about this new world and how to navigate it. With teenagers, there's a need for constant dialogue about the nature of real-world relationships, online risks, and safety. We need to speak plainly about consent, respect, and intimacy, about how algorithms manipulate attention, about sexting, deepfakes, and the pressures of curated online lives. And equally, we need to affirm that there are infinite ways in which to be a girl, a boy, a man, or a woman, and that conformity to stereotypes isn't a marker of individual worth. We also need to nurture real-world identity development, and that's sport, music, political engagement, volunteering, other interests. These are all vital ways in which young people build real-world identities, leaving them less vulnerable to the hollowness of online validation. And finally, we need to create opportunities for connection and community. The picture isn't simple, but I think there's lots we can do. Thank you.
Thank you, Matilda. That was a fascinating presentation, and I think you set out explicitly the concerns about online content and its impact on women and girls. So thank you so much for that, and I'm sure we'll have some questions for Matilda at the end. So next up, we've got Michael Conroy. Michael is an educator and an activist with 16 years in UK secondary schools, specialising in boys' development and mental health. He's trained hundreds in suicide prevention and domestic abuse intervention, and created Foundations, a pioneering programme for boys aged between 9 and 12. He's a regular media commentator, and he tackles online misogyny, radicalisation, and the influence of digital culture on young men. Michael, thank you for coming along, and over to you.
Thanks very much. Just to say, I also work with lots of adolescents and late teens and early 20s too. So, and in fact, the younger age group is something that has hoved into view. Yeah, I started with secondary age and adolescents and young adults, but then recently, in recent years, I've been doing lots of work with primary, which I think tells a story about the transmission of ideas through falling down the age range. In fact, the only numbers, I'm going to talk a little bit about porn, the only number that is going down is the age of exposure, and the rest of all the stats I'll have a quick look at a tale of exponential growth. I've got some really awkward slides, and I really apologise because I've got multiple clicks within each one, so I might have to say it a few times. Sorry to be a pain in the backside, but you know, it's the way.
It just do that.
Yeah, it's all like that. Right then, okay. Now I remember. I can see it. I've been to read back, so that's fine. That's what a young boy said to me 3 years ago. He came early to a group session because I was running regular groups before I stopped working in schools, which is 2021. And I didn't know what he meant. I've no idea what he meant. So if you really have to choke them, didn't know what he meant. No idea. And now it's something that is talked about frequently. Of course, he meant it by his goals, and he meant strangulation, because choking in porn speak for strangulation, unfortunately. And that, for me, was two things. It was heartbreaking and earth-shatteringly bad, but also wonderful that he asked, because it meant that he didn't want it. It went against something in him, a sense of empathy, sense of justice, and a sense of humanity. So I was really pleased and heartbroken that he asked the question. And I think that clash of emotions is something that is found often in work with boys and young men. If we create the space, is that some of the questions and some of the statements are hair-raising and blood-curdling and horrifying, and yet they are speaking about them. And if we do not create spaces for them, I believe, as professionals and parents and carers, then someone else will have that dialogue with them. And in fact, it's more of a monologue. So I've gone off script already. I've only got the first line. Yeah, sorry. Right. Okay. Apologies. The second clip is everybody's favourite, Andrew Tate. One more clip is a quote from him. I'm not doing it. Okay, never mind.
Maybe use the keyboard.
Don't worry about it. I would say, amongst other influences, there are many, he is a proponent of choking as a way of disciplining women. I know that's kind of, you find that instantly. And then last year, I was surprised to find out that actually a domestic abuse charity that went into schools in South Wales was a proponent of the view that choking was okay if you got consent, which is utterly illegal and untrue and dangerous. But an interesting indicator of the pornification of culture, that a domestic abuse charity could become a voice for the porn mega industrial complex and all the harms of that. That's how far down the rabbit hole we've gone. And there's all kinds of reasons for that, about what is the demographic of people who work there, how young they are, what their experiences in university are, and groupthink, and the fear of saying, no, this is wrong, this is harmful, this is not liberating or empowering, or all the other bullshit that is doing the rounds. So I'm going completely off script. I can see that it's come back, but that's the opening slide. So next slide, please. What is the world offering boys? I don't know, some of you will have sons, or we work with boys, you've got nephews or stepsons, whatever it is. Dublin University did a really interesting bit of research, I think it was about a year ago, where they got 30 brand new smartphones and they registered in the names of boys aged 16 to 18. Is anybody? Anyway, I'm speaking to a Zoom, sorry about that. And the only connection was they all followed each other. So the researchers pretending to be groups of teenage boys who followed each other just on, I think, Instagram, nothing more than that. Half of the phones were used to Google Andrew Tate and the hinterland that comes with it, and got what you expect, misogynistic content, but always get rich quick, Bitcoin, all that garbage, always clustered around that. The other half of the group didn't Google for anything, but within 23 minutes, they got the same content. Because that's how the algorithm works. Old school, oh, I want to go to Corfu, I get loads of cheap flights to Corfu because I've asked for it. That's just one algorithmic performance. The other one is, it looks at your networks and thinks, well, you're not asking for this, but they are. Therefore, friendship works on similarity and common bonds, therefore peer pressure. Therefore, we'll give you what your networks are looking for. And I think that can surprise some parents and teachers, etc. It's not necessarily what is Johnny looking for, it's what's looking for Johnny. But that is the paradigm shift, I would say. Certainly, when I was at school, I had a calculator. I used to put 80085 in there. And maybe I'm not the only person who ever did that. I don't know. It seems like some of you may have done it. But what did that connect us to when we did that? Where did we go with it? Nowhere. It's just in a calculator. That same 12, 11-year-old curiosity, sense of intrigue, do this a little bit naughty. If you were to put those letters, BOOBS, into Google, what would you be connected with within 1 minute? 5 minutes, 6 weeks, 5 years. Where does it take you? What communities does that? You're talking about connection and community. That's supremely important to health and well-being and kind of development of notions of self. Unfortunately, one of the functions of the internet is it can create simulated connections and community around really negative social norms, and we can see that play out in all kinds of ways. So, what is the world offering boys? Well, a whole load of garbage about who they're supposed to be and what women are for, and basically women are there for sexual use. All functions, yeah. Could you click all the way through? I think that's probably. I'll tell you where. Okay, one more thing. Yes, perfect. It's just a bundle of functions of porn. And we were talking about this the other day, so we won't functions of porn that are evident from how it's used in my work with boys and young men over 16 years, but also in the work of the professionals who I now train, and youth workers, social workers, youth justice and teachers. Well, it's a bonding activity. It brings you together. Back in the day, 20, 30 years ago, you'd be sharing magazines or sitting in a room with the curtains closed watching a video, or perhaps going to a porn cinema or lap dancing club, but it does spill over into prostitution, of course, because they're absolutely inseparable. I think I'd is going to talk a little bit about that. So it's a bonding activity, where it's an in-group, out-group thing. So it's a way of making friendship, or it's a rule of friendship, or it's even perhaps for some boys a price of admission that you accept that and you circulate it, even if it goes against your emerging sense and of values and respect and empathy. But at the same time that it binds, it also separates and disconnects, because it can lead to social isolation because of time spent on it. It creates a feeling that is not replicable, easily replicable in the physical world. And there is, I would say that is across the board, but there is some really interesting research and evidence, and I would suggest you Google it, about boys with autism and porn, about a disproportionate representation of those young men, not exclusive by any means, but disproportionate, because of the way that it offers a feeling of connection and pleasure, separate from and distinct from the risks of interpersonal contact. So it's a bonding and a breaking thing as well. Over the years, this is qualitative and anecdotal, and please do somebody shout me when I've done enough time. I've trained 3,500 people in the past 4 years on the programme about working with boys and young men in a confident way, and a way that is rooted in a positive vision for boys, what about their humanity, because the humanity of women is impossible if the humanity of men is intentionally propagandized as something that is very limited and cruel and monodimensional. I would say that it's really, although the focus of my work is with boys and young men, it's also girls and women, but by osmosis and diffusion, because it's by the ideas and the values of which are in male bodies. The trajectory is really interesting. I know a lot of people who are pro-porn and pro-pimping, etc. They say, well, it's just the same as vases in ancient Greece and murals in India and things like that. As if there is some kind of gradual development from that to watching AI versions of women being beheaded, and you're thinking, hang on a minute, then there is no gradual development. It's a series of paradigmatic ruptures. So maybe it has been around for 4,000 years or 5,000 years of graffiti in Pompeii, etc., etc. So what? That is not the same as children now at that key point in kind of neural development, having tastes offered to them which are rooted in domination, exploitation, and degradation. There is no parity, there is no kind of continuum there. It's really weird when you think of the speed of it. So we had thousands of years of paintings and murals and frescoes, etc. And then in the past 110 years, it's all happened. From the printing press to magazines to cine to video. I remember video. I mean, man, we don't need to remember it's all over the digital, but now that the frontier is kind of happening while we're here now, so that I'm hearing stories that boys no longer have to threaten to share images. They just have to make it known that they will create images. And who's to know the difference? How many of us could successfully spot in 20 AI films the fake from the real? I mean, we can't. We're not really sure that anything we've seen on the screen in the last week is genuinely the case, because of the quality of it. And that power is in the pocket of every teenager in the country and beyond, which is somewhat a wake-up call. I'm not going to go much further, apart from, can you just one more click, please? Yeah, sorry. So the permanence of porn, it's not something that you have to go and walk to have a look at an amphora in somebody rich's house anymore. It's with everybody all the time. And all those other things that draw into globalization, but also the blurring between production. There used to be producers of porn and consumers. That's the same person now. There is no meaningful distinction between those two things. Everybody with a phone could be a pornographer, and that could be a 12-year-old, unfortunately. And the only stat that's going down is the average age, and as Tilda was saying, we're looking at 12, 11, 10. You know, the Children's Commission did an interesting report. It was 2023 when that came out. And as I said earlier, you know, increasingly doing work with primary schools who are really, really deeply concerned about sexualized language in year 6, year 5, so we're talking about 10 and 9-year-old boys, towards female staff. So I'm rambling somewhat. What I really would like to say is that we're in a stage of human history that has never been done before. The ubiquity, the permanence, and the algorithmic targeting of fundamental values, which are, I believe, are inimical to democracy and to women's human rights, and which have a degrading impact on the humanity of boys and men as well. We've never had this before, so we've got a colossal wake-up call coming, and I think we're starting to see signs of that. And surgeons who are working with, you know, colorectal surgeons working with massively increased numbers of girls who have had normalised anal intercourse, because the physiology of women is different to the physiology of men. Who knew? Who knew? I was cancelled for something at this British sexual health conference about 3 years ago because I was going to talk about that, and they said it was homophobic. I was thinking, no, we're heterosexuals here. Just cancelled. And I asked them to explain why. Plus, he said, no, we can't explain why. Well, that's all right. Other people have had this, and I'm not complaining about that. It's just a fact. Because the topic was the impact of misogyny on girls' sexual health. So I thought it was reasonable to mention that. It seemed somehow germane, and yet it was deemed inadmissible. Anyway, I'm a big advocate of working with boys and young men intentionally, positively, and optimistically about what the world is offering them in the here and now, what it's like to be them, who they are being asked to be by the global kind of totality of everything they consume, and what it means about women and girls as well. At the same time, kind of look at it as a strand that is interconnected and indivisible. But as a starting point, working with boys and young men so that we can have a hope of healthier, safer adult men going forward. And I've gone off script, I've rambled, and thank you very much.
Absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much, Michael. I think
Well, in September, a different group of children arrived who
never more important than it is now. We will have questions at the end. So I'll move on to Kaiser Ekman, who is a Swedish author, a journalist, and editor-in-chief of Parable Press. Her books, including Being and Being Bought and On the Meaning of Sex, challenge commodification and redefine womanhood. She's spoken at over 1,000 conferences worldwide on women's rights, economic crises, and geopolitics. Kaiser brings a sharp feminist critique of digital exploitation on the systems that enable it. So Kaiser, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you so much. I won't be bothering you. I don't have a PowerPoint. So I'm going to speak about prostitution and OnlyFans. I'll get to OnlyFans at the end. But first of all, if we want to understand why online prostitution is bad, we have to understand why prostitution is bad in itself, right? So why is prostitution bad? Prostitution is sex between two people, one that wants it and one that doesn't. And the one that wants it pays the person who doesn't, and thus converts a no into a yes. So money in that case replaces consent and is thus the proof that consent was absent in the first place. Because if there was consent, or as I would like to rephrase it, actually mutual desire, because as we know, when you're asked to consent to cookies online, it's not that you desire the cookies, you're just too lazy to say no. So the same thing goes for sex. I mean, either you desire it or you don't. So it's obvious with prostitution, you know, whether it takes place in an upscale hotel, a dingy brothel, in a dark alley in Romania, or a luxury suite in Dubai, there is the same criteria. One person that wants it and one that doesn't. So we all know that when we desire sexual relationships with someone, you know, we don't charge. We also know that when we desire someone and respect someone, and that person all of a sudden says, well, you have to pay me. If we respect the person, we obviously ask, well, why? You don't like me. I mean, we all know this, right? So how can we tolerate an institution that turns one part into an object that doesn't desire the sex? So we can conclude that changing the venue of the place of prostitution from street to brothel or back to the street doesn't change the original problem. The original problem, of course, is the absence of desire. Neither does taxing the parties involved or providing condoms. So what else is specific about prostitution? Well, usually it takes place, I mean, normal, I don't know if you can use that word anymore without sounding archaic, but so sexual relationships that are desired usually take place between people who know each other somehow and who like each other. Whereas in prostitution, these two people encounter each other in very different circumstances. You have, first of all, one that's poor and one that's rich. You have one that's a woman or a girl and one that's a man. That's like in 90% of the cases. In 10%, the person selling can be a boy or a man, but the person buying is always a man. There is a lot of documentaries made about women who go somewhere and pay for sex, but those account for like 0.0 something. So it's not even 1%. We also have on one hand a child, on the other hand an adult. The average age of entry into prostitution worldwide is 14 years old. And people think, wow, it's not wow. It's understandable because somebody who's like 45 like me, you wouldn't do such a thing because you already have sexual integrity. You know how to say no. When you're 14, you can't say no. A woman usually is in her 30s before she realizes she can have demands in bed. She can say no in bed. She knows what she likes and what she doesn't. So for a 14-year-old to say no to an adult is unthinkable. You're taught to do what an adult says, right? So that's why it's easier to manipulate children and groom them into becoming prostitutes. Other differences. One is homeless, the other one has a home. Most of the time, the prostituted person is running away from somewhere, is in a foster home or in a place that she's not comfortable in. She's jobless, he has a job. She's single, he has a wife. Most of the time, the sex buyer has a wife. So why is she single? Well, you can think about it yourselves. It's not easy to, uphold a relationship when you're having sex with 5 or 10 or 20 men every day. It's very difficult for all this talk about sex workers, work, and so on. For any man to bring home a girlfriend and have his parents ask, so what's your job? Oh, I'm a sex worker. Oh, we're not that tolerant now, right? So more inequalities. She's controlled, he's free. Nobody puts a gun to his head saying you have to pay for sex or you die. We all know that. He can leave anytime, whereas we know it's not the same case for her. So other inequalities are racial. She's darker than he, he's whiter than her, usually. She's from a poorer country than he is. So how do these two parties meet if they're from different countries? Either by bringing her to him, which is sex trafficking, or him to her, which is sex tourism. It's very often considered that sex trafficking is way worse than sex tourism. It could be argued so because she's brought to a place that she doesn't know. She's closed into an apartment. She might be, having a passport taken away. She doesn't speak the language. But then again, it's not the traveling that's the problem. It's the actual prostitution. So when women speak about the harms of prostitution, it's not the fact that they were taken somewhere. It's what happens in it. And that happens anywhere, even in our own country. So, and last difference is that she is visible, he's hidden. She's exposed either on the street, in a brothel, on the internet, often naked. For a lot of women to be exposed even half naked is kind of not so desirable. Men, on the other hand, send dick pics to everybody. But here in prostitution, his name is hidden, his body is hidden, he's anonymous. Whereas she is exposed with, you know, her measurements, her age, her whole body, often filmed. So when she wants to start a new life, she's afraid maybe somebody's seen me. And now with online porn and often John's wanting to film the whole encounter, she can never be safe that her life is really past. Because anytime somebody can cross on the street and say, I've seen you in this porn film. So in the 90s, trafficking resulting from prostitution had become so big that countries had to tackle it somehow. They went about this quite differently. So some countries like Poland or Germany decided to legalize pimping, legalize sex buying, legalize everything, turning pimps into basically normal capitalists. And Sweden, on the other hand, my country, chose to ban the purchase of sex. So we were the first to do so in '99, meaning that selling sex, being a prostitute, was and is still legal, whereas paying for sex or intending to pay for sex was criminalized. So this actually enabled us to avoid the whole trafficking wave that came later in the 2000s, thankfully. And because it was then diverted to Norway, where all the mafias went because they couldn't go to Sweden, Norway quickly adopted the same law. And after that, as we know, more notably France, Ireland, and more countries right now, Spain is on the verge of having the same abolitionist law. So the sex industry had a big problem, a big PR problem, just like maybe the tobacco industry back in the days. You know, it's like when we speak about prostitution, well, we speak about trafficking, we speak about misery, we speak about women being dead. So what do? They invented OnlyFans. So OnlyFans, just like sugar dating before, or any of these inventions, renamed the whole thing. All of a sudden, you know, you don't call them prostitutes, you call them content creators or models. And you don't call the John sex buyers, you call them subscribers. So, and they were lucky because they came around during the pandemic when anyway people were not meeting. So of course, you know, online prostitution made sense. Who created OnlyFans? It was a British guy, pimp, Tim Stokely. He'd made unsuccessful porn sites in the past, such as Glam Worship and Customs for You. That didn't work. He borrowed 10,000 quid from his father and created OnlyFans and became super rich and is now kind of adored by men online. Like, wow, if you Google him, it's like, how much is his net worth, and like interviews by him in like financial newspapers and magazines. So, but what online prostitution sites such as OnlyFans really did was it brought in the middle class girls. That's the big change that we're seeing now. So all the things I was speaking about prostitution, it was poor women, homeless women, women who are running away from somewhere, young girls. That's not applicable to OnlyFans. Because OnlyFans, what it did was it targeted the middle class, young girls, in order to tell them this is not really prostitution. This is safe. These were the girls that like wouldn't walk out on the street and prostitute themselves because it just wasn't their environment. But to sit in your own room and create videos, maybe in the beginning not so sexual, later on more sexual, this they thought was safer. And it didn't have quite the miserable ring as prostitution. What it also did was it normalized prostitution for boys who might not have gone down to the red light district to pay for sex, but subscribing to something online, it wasn't as bad. So is OnlyFans prostitution? Of course it is, because it has the same basic idea, one that wants it and one that doesn't. So the young model, so to speak, who's 19 years old, and the subscribers, who might be 60-year-old men, she's not desiring to show her body to them. They are desiring to see hers. They are telling her what to do. She's visible, they're hidden. So it's the same structure. And you know that it's even scarier for her. They're so hidden that it might be her neighbor, her teacher, it might be her stepfather, it might be anybody. You don't know who's seeing you, but they're seeing her. So we have again the old patriarchal structure of hiding the private life of the married man and showing the body and the everything of the young female. Also, I heard a prostitution survivor put it really eloquently. She said, on the streets, he is humiliating you, he's raping you, he's peeing on you. In the digital brothel, you're doing it to yourself. You are humiliating yourself. But it's still the same thing. And people have this idea, and I think it's created by the media, who every time prostitution changes name, they publish all these, I think, advertisements, but in the form of an article where it's like, model earns millions on OnlyFans, or I remember when sugar dating came along, that was short-lived because it turned out it's just average prostitution. When that came around, all the articles about sugar dating were illustrated by these photos of like some Richard Gere type of man, you know, like at a fancy restaurant, and it was chocolate and roses and wine and rings and gold. And you got the idea that some unknown man is going to pay you $3,000 to have dinner with you. I mean, that just doesn't happen unless you're Kim Kardashian or someone. So they've done the same thing with OnlyFans, basically portraying it as, you know, this is a great way to make money. And they're only writing articles about the ones that make lots of money. Whereas we know that the average income for somebody on OnlyFans is like $2,000 a year, which is nothing. I mean, and you know how much time and sweat and blood they spend doing that stuff. And what we also realize is, of course, trafficking moved to OnlyFans. So you have videos of children as young as 5. You have women being trafficked to make sex videos, and then they hire like online chatting people who are not the woman in question chatting, but of course the sex buyer thinks that he's chatting with the actual girl, but it's somebody else chatting. So pimping, of course, moved in there too. And the actual site is a pimping site. I mean, they take 20% off of the earnings. So no doubt they're earning money just like any pimp, except the fact that any normal pimp from the street doesn't get articles in the Financial Times about, wow, what a great invention. So you see how easy it is to fool us. You just change the name and change the place, and all of a sudden we're debating something else. But this is the same thing. So now that we've been talking about all this depressing stuff the whole night, I have great news to announce actually that Sweden banned OnlyFans buying since July 1st of this year. So it's not, they don't name the platform, but they say sex buying from a distance goes under the same law as sex buying. So you can't pay for services. I mean, you can watch like pre-recorded material, which is basically porn, that's still not dealt with. But you can't tell somebody on OnlyFans, do this for me, pay for it. So you will be prosecuted, you will get up to 1 year in jail. If you're an online pimp, you will get 4 years in jail. So I think that's great. We'll see how it works in reality if they actually manage to prosecute people. I mean, it's like I always get this question, so is there no prostitution in Sweden? I mean, that would be the first law in the history of the world that, you know, would like just make crime diminish. I mean, wouldn't that be amazing? Like, you know, we have laws against murder in all countries of the world, but it's not like, oh, because of that, nobody kills each other, oh, the law doesn't work. No, it's not like that. But what we did was we changed the norms. It's not acceptable in society in Sweden to pay for sex. You can't, you know, take your colleagues to a brothel or a strip club. I mean, you don't do that. You don't, if you pay for sex, you don't talk to your male friends like, oh, I pay for sex. No, this is not acceptable. And you know that you might get caught and you will be prosecuted. And for like respectable type of man, that's no fun. We had some famous people getting caught. And We had one guy who was a kind of multi-famous guy. He was a boxer, he was a politician, he had 8 companies, he was a TV host. One of these people who do everything. So it just so happened that in the morning, he wrote on Instagram to his girlfriend, like, oh, you're just the love of my life, like just sharing the life with you is amazing, blah, blah, blah. The same night he was caught paying for sex. So there went his companies, his talk show engagements, and the girlfriend. Thanks to this law, we make him visible. So the sex bar is not hidden anymore, and that's the whole point, to visibilize, visualize. That's also a person doing this. You know, so yeah, I just wanna finish by saying, I don't think there's any country where it's legal to rape somebody, to coerce somebody into having sex, right? To force someone to have sex against their will is illegal everywhere. So how come if you do it economically, by giving her a bill or giving her pimp a bill, all of a sudden it's okay? It's not okay, right? And the best thing of all is that if we take away prostitution, nothing bad happens. Nobody dies. The only thing that happens is all these men have to actually find somebody to have sex with that want to have sex with them. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. That's really, really powerful. Thank you so much. Lots to think about. I know there'll be lots of questions. And just to start with, through all of the 3 speakers, we've heard a lot this evening about harm to children and young people. So I was just interested just to kind of think it and break it down into policies, and thinking about what bits of legislation could or would you advise us as Liberal Democrats as a political party to champion or indeed avoid in these areas? So Matilda, can I ask you that, and then we'll hands up for questions.
Yeah, of course. I'm going, so on the porn front, obviously, and I think OnlyFans, the idea about making the purchase of it illegal, I think is a really, really powerful move, and I look forward to seeing what happens in terms of rates of usage, etc., going forward. On the social media front, I think I'm going to say something that maybe slightly appears to go against some of the content of what I was saying. I'm not sure that a social media ban, as has been put into place in Australia, is necessarily the right way to go. So what they've done is totally ban social media for under 16s. I think it could work, but I think we need much better information, and we need much more conversation and dialogue about what the potential downsides are, and then how you avoid those downsides. So just to pull a couple of examples out, one of the risks is that if we ban kind of normal platforms like Instagram, TikTok, etc., for under 16s, those who have been on social media will seek out those platforms. If they go into a kind of dark space that we've got even less oversight of, then how do we manage that? But there's also this kind of cliff edge idea. So if a 16-year-old gets social media not having had any gentle introduction or help from parents, help from teachers in terms of how to manage the online world, then actually the risks of it happening just all at once might be greater. It may not, it may be fine, but I think we do actually need to think these issues through a little more before coming up with very, very severe policies on social media. But obviously, age verification, absolutely key. We need to think about kind of VPNs and how teenagers getting around that and what we do. And it's probably a lot more about kind of device control and oversight than there is at the moment.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, I would echo everything that Matilda said there, but I also think perhaps with particular focus in education, there should be some structural change that supports teachers in the delivery of PSHE, because it is largely done I mean, almost exclusively done by teachers who trying to be a maths teacher, or a geography teacher, or a PE teacher, which is, there's no way to run a jumble sale, is it? Never mind like a national way of delivering some of the most important, potentially life-saving information to young people. It's put in the hands of, and this is no disrespect, amateurs in that field, but also, this is a very rarely spoken area. A lot of our teachers are victim survivors of sexual assault and abuse and domestic violence themselves. And we expect them, who signed up to teach French, to suddenly, confidently and happily engage in a set of conversations that could easily re-traumatize them. And that is utter lunacy. So I think something radical around the support for teachers, but also the creation of space in the curriculum for conversations, which I think should take place sometimes single sex. I'm a great proponent of single sex sessions and dialogues with boys and with girls, but my experience and I was going to say skills then, but I don't know break the body. Is with boys and young men, but girls and young men clearly need that kind of bespoke support as well, because we experience the world on a sex axis. There is no rational denial of that. And certainly with algorithms, the stuff that's going for boys is not the same as the stuff that's going for girls. Therefore, we need to talk with boys about the stuff that's coming for them. No worries, no qualms, no apologies. So I think something quite radical along those lines.
And I think that the algorithms is something that has come out so strongly here. How do we contain those algorithms? Is it possible?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I would say it's entirely possible. We are led to believe that things are impossible because they make people fortunes of money. That's that simple. You can change anything. It's just programming. It's code. We can code this or we can code that. Let's code that instead.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so the experience from Sweden is that we tried education for 15-20 years and it didn't work, unfortunately. So when we first started speaking about prostitution as a problem was in the late 70s, when we had this very groundbreaking governmental inquiry about what prostitution really was. It was the first time they interviewed women in prostitution about how they felt. And what they said was, I mean, it was like a bomb. So it was even suppressed because the researcher thought that MPs shouldn't read these things because it was so vulgar, the language, and it was so brutal. But it was released anyway as a book, and it just changed the conversation about what prostitution was. And the idea back then was that by educating men and making them understand how prostitutes feel, they will stop paying for sex. And it just didn't work. It didn't change anything. So I think it's difficult to educate someone not to do something when it's legal. So how can you tell them, yeah, you shouldn't do it, but you can? Of course, we can speak about rape because there is a law. So we can say you shouldn't rape, and there's also a law that says it's illegal, right? So when we had the sex purchase ban, the number of sex buyers went down from 1 in 8 to 1 in 13. I mean, it just didn't happen in the 20 years that we were just educating people. And we had public campaigns, we had all these things that just didn't work. And just as a comparison, in Denmark, 1 in 6 men are paying for sex. And that's a country that has a similar culture to ours, and everything else that's similar. It's legal. So of course, when it's legal and you can find it online, you can find it on a street, there's strip club, there's brothel, of course somebody's gonna go in. And I also agree that putting it all on teachers, I mean, it seems like they're gonna solve, world hunger by now. It's just everything is put on them. I mean, less resources every day and still like schools to solve something that adults are doing themselves. So I just think that's a bit too much. I think we need to use laws to establish what's correct and what's not correct. And then, of course, if they work, that depends on the police as well. It depends on the application of the laws. A law on itself is just a piece of paper, but then you need to allocate resources for them to actually work with it. for us, it was really difficult in the beginning because the police weren't educated and they thought this is not a real crime. But that changed, and now, I mean, if you would invite, for example, the police officer in Stockholm that's head of the anti-prostitution group, I mean, he would sound like a radical feminist. You know, it's crazy how that's changed because they realized that through the sex buyers, they could get to all those people they were looking for because they all pay for sex. All these criminals pay for sex, and all these pimps are doing other stuff as well. So it's like the entrance to a whole other world.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to open up to questions from the floor. We've got a hand straight up in the air, and just let me know if you want to ask a question, and I'll put you in the queue.
Thank you, all of you, for such fantastic speeches. They're really amazingly eye-opening. I've got a question for Kaiser in particular. Just wanted to ask in what were the kind of specific social or political circumstances that you think led to the Swedish government enacting this ban on sex buying?
Yeah, so civil society had worked on this for 20 years. I mean, the feminist movement was really strong. Women MPs across party lines got together actually to work for this. So most parties voted for it, but I think the strongest factor was there was no real opposition. So the sex industry didn't have time to organize. You have to think about the fact this was 99. We didn't have this kind of lobby that we have now. So the sex industry back then was just street pimps. I mean, they were in no shape or form able to go and talk to politicians. We didn't have this slick sex industry that we have now where they hire people to pose as happy sex workers and come to conferences and make picket lines and just, you know, disrupt the whole conversation. And it's all fake, actually. You know, I write about it in my book. I went across Europe to undercover those so-called trade unions for sex workers, and it turns out they're not trade unions at all. I mean, it's just either pimps or just deluded academics and you know, yeah, people of any sort except basically people in prostitution who are behind that. So all that's kind of delayed it in the rest of Europe because you have something that you think is a big group of women in prostitution and all kinds of people who would oppose laws like that, but they actually don't really exist. We didn't have that, so there was nobody saying anything. That came later, that came in 2006 with the onset of blogs, when blogs started coming. Then they could hide and make all sorts of blogs that all emanated from the same person and say that, oh, there's always opposition to the law, but there wasn't. But by then it was too late because we already saw that it worked. You know, in fact, nobody misses prostitution. Nobody misses the days when you would walk out, you know, of your house and see condoms lined up on the street or just, you know, I mean, nobody really misses it at all. So, and it feels great to, you know, be a woman and know that even if somebody just asks you, like, how much do you cost, that's a crime.
That's good.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you all. They're really excellent presentations. I'm only sorry we didn't have the video going properly early on. But following up that question to you, Kaiser, and of course you other 2 and 3 will have views too. This happened, making it legal. The Nordic model happened some time ago before they got going, but it's spreading. It's spread to Spain, it's spread to both parts of Ireland, you know, the Republic and the Northern Ireland. And I think Ash Regan's introducing something in the Scottish Parliament. Yeah. So now that there is the PR work going on with sex sellers, how are they managing to make it illegal in the teeth of the opposition?
Wait, can you rephrase that because I'm not. Who are you? Who do you mean is managing to?
Well, you said that it started in Sweden, then it went to Norway, and it's gone to Spain. They've made that illegal, and it's illegal in both parts of Ireland. Yeah. So that's only recently taken place in the last few years, when there is quite a bit of PR work going about by sex purveyors.
Oh, now I understand your question. Sorry. No, I think because prostitution's become such a big problem. I mean, we all know we have to do something about it. I mean, because it just, You know, I think we're in a similar situation as, 100 years ago with, regulated prostitution and, when the white slave trade, as it was called back then, and the League of Nations made a study, where's this all coming from? And they realized it was, institutionalized prostitution. That's where it all started. So, I mean, it's the same situation again. You legalize prostitution, you think, oh, great. And what happens? You get all this trafficking, all this crime, nobody wants to live in the area. So actually the Dutch and the Germans are coming to Sweden to study the model because they're realizing, oh, their model is not working. Then for political reasons, it takes time and there's all these vested interests. In France, they made a great campaign that I think anyone can learn from how to make political campaigns. I mean, they first got one MP and they convinced her to be pro-abolitionist. And then they told her, can you convince one more person? And she convinced one person and they went on like this. And finally they voted for it. So it was a great campaign. But in Spain, they're having trouble because the sex industry is so strong. At the same time, they know they have to do something because they're getting, all this mafia from Latin America coming with loads of women every day. And then when they quit prostitution, they end up in Spain and they're just destitute and they have no place to go and they just need help and the Spanish system has to take care of them. So it's creating all these victims. And then again, when you speak about prostitution, nobody thinks, what does the prostitute do afterwards? They're just thinking about the now. What does she do when she's like too old, or too just, just wasted to go on? What is she gonna do? I mean, nobody talks about that. So, but they exist, of course. And I think that's one thing that people were saying to us. So, oh, you're gonna end prostitution. What are you gonna do with all these prostitutes? And then when survivors said, well, they never asked us that question when the sex industry threw us out at the age of 25. Because we were drug addicts, alcoholics, and full of bruises.
So you have a strategy. So as well as making it illegal, you also have a strategy to train women so they have got an exit possibility.
Well, the bad thing that we did wrong that I think France is doing better is that we just made a law that's just that law and nothing else. So it's up to any region if they want to allocate resources to this or not. So some do it, some don't. Now in France, it's mandatory. So they changed all these criminal codes and educational code, and they changed everything to accommodate the new law. So in France, you also have to learn about it in schools. Every town or village has to have some program. I mean, it's amazing what they did. So yeah, we didn't think of all of it.
Thank you. I think we've got one more question. Yeah.
Yes, I was wondering, particularly Michael, you mentioned about Andrew Tate and the toxic influence he's having on young boys. I wondered, why is the toxic influence so dominant? Is there like no one online presenting a positive, non-toxic influence for how the young men should be? And if there is, why is that not?
Well, there are some, but they're not algorithmically lucrative. That's a big thing, because it's not just if you look at an Andrew Tate video, for example, it's really interesting to look at what else comes up. There's all kind of the gambling mega industry, Bitcoin, all kinds of speculative capitalist enterprises, protein supplements, big money. So it's not just that; it's the hinterland that comes with it, which is real rich. And so I would say that the appeal to boys, which I think perhaps is the crucial point, because it is emotional. I think it's speaking to feelings of you need to belong, like fundamental human stuff. You want to belong, you want to build a tribe, you want to feel that people have got your back, feel that you're bigger than you actually are, because lots of young boys are very nervous about themselves, but that is not an acceptable feeling, because you're not supposed to feel vulnerable, and you're supposed to, therefore you have to be ashamed to be vulnerable. Therefore, you enter worlds where vulnerability is dismissed, and seen as outside and beyond your experience. So it's like creating a fantasy world. I always think that the world of Andrew Tate is very much like the rich pyramid of any hierarchical power structure. You're either at the top or you're no one. And women are always never, oh, they're never at the top, so they're always no one. But for men, the message is if you're not here at the top 1%, then you're an also ran. And that's an interesting internal monologue to instill in boys, millions of boys, that you're either that narrow, extractive, domineering, awful person, or no one. And that propaganda is relentless, relentless. So I would say, follow the money.
Do you have any suggestions for that, how to change that environment online? So people are seeing better messages.
Well, there's interesting stuff. There was a young man who set up this app called Quitter, Quittr, about stopping porn. But when you look at it, he has no critique of power structures whatsoever. He's dealing with it as a habit. It's just as if it's like excessive masturbation, and it kind of spoils your friendship group, or it impacts on your golf or something like that. And it's completely devoid and separated from the reality of porn is an extractive industry. It's like a meat grinder for women, isn't it? And he's made tens of millions. He's only 19. So there are fake things, I think, and that's a fake thing. There is, but ultimately, it's capitalism. Ultimately, capitalism plus 7,000-year-old patriarchal same old shit.
Thanks.
Thank you. Just following
Yes,
on from that, Matilda, what are your greatest concerns about online content and its impact on women and girls?
I think the normalisation of women selling themselves for sex through OnlyFans is a massive one, because if you look at Lily Phillips and Bonnie Blue, they've kind of captured the imagination of lots of girls and young women thinking that this is a way, you could make money out of it, fine. I think a lot realise that they never will do so and wouldn't want to go into it anyway, but it creates this set of ideas that it is an acceptable transaction, that actually women are there in that kind of subject-object relationship to men, and I think it creates these very dangerous norms and messages that everybody's internalising. It's not just girls and women, but to their detriment.
Thank you.
The power of the mythology of the industry around OnlyFans, for example, is palpable talking with boys, because they, you know, you're talking about the media is kind of part of the PR thing. They talk about the millionaires, there's like 1 in a million who makes a lot of money, but they're the ones that stay in the memory. And I've spoken lots of times with boys who are convinced that all women who do OnlyFans, for example, enjoy it, choose to do it, and make a fortune. And I realised it was no use me providing counter facts. It felt like it wasn't. So we had to start talking about, why do we believe what we believe? And then it became more philosophical. If we can explain to ourselves and acknowledge that we believe things that suit us sometimes, then that can help create the ground to go back and have the conversation about OnlyFans. But I did find that sometimes diving in from the trade facts didn't work, because it was operating on an emotional level rather than a logical one, if that makes sense.
Thank you so much. It's been absolutely fascinating. What can we do?
Great question. Who's going to start that one off?
Rosa, can I come to you
No.
first?
Give you 2 seconds to think about it.
Nominated.
Who's we? Everybody.
Everybody,
Has been nominated first already.
That's right.
Yeah.
No, you start.
Yeah.
No,
Please, no, I'm going to give Kaz a bit of a breather. Michael.
Okay, I think it's about conversations, and I think we need to stop being scared about having conversations about all these things with teenagers and young adults, bring everything into the light, teach critical thinking, and just not stop talking about it.
What she said. And to try and do those conversations in ways that don't feel like an attack. Because that just leads to kind of dissolving of the relationship. And there's all kinds of interesting techniques like that about avoiding eye contact, having conversations side by side, chatting while you drive, all kinds of just little things. But ultimately, as Tilda said, just conversations have to be had.
Can I add to that question? So I am the Women and Girls' Rights Champion for one of our local towns in Lisbon. That's what I do, and I am expressly focusing on violence against women and girls and domestic abuse. I am not a specialist by any stretch of the imagination. I've been doing this for a few months, and it is horrific. And I've been talking to young women as well about how, particularly online, all this is impacting on them. For me, what I need to do is to find out how I can source, if you like, the right people. You quite rightly say that teachers should not be taking this on board. So how do we find how do we source the right people that can be working on this? I don't have any kids, so I can't have those conversations. But it's just how can we do that? How can I do that as the Women and Girls' Rights Champion? Who can I talk to make sure that we're getting the right information out to kids in our communities, in our schools?
That's a question. Can we put links together to share with people who turned up? Is that possible? I think that's probably, for me, that would be, I can bundle things together and then you can make your own mind up.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, because there are many experts out there that you could invite.
Deirdre, next teacher.
Yeah, sorry.
Can I put in a word for teachers? I think there's a wee problem here. So, for example, if you've got a good school where the teachers and the pupils have good relationships, and the pupils know the teachers and trust the teachers, and there are teachers who say, right, I'm going to get trained on this, and the teachers go and get trained, and then they have these conversations with the pupils that they know and the pupils trust them. I think that is definitely a way forward. If you just say, oh, we're going to get these outside groups then because they'll do it, and all the others just say, yeah, I don't want to do it, I don't want to do it. There's a huge danger, and I think this is happening quite a lot, that they're sort of parachuting in people who perhaps have different agendas from the agendas that the parents would really want.
100%.
So you know, you can't write off the teachers.
No.
The teachers are prepared as yourself
Oh,
to do it.
You're dead right. You're dead right. They're the people that you've got a relationship with and you're familiar with, and who are part of a stringent safeguarding network as well, which external providers are not. And we've seen millions of these clients for the last 10 years. They've had an open field, haven't they? So went to schools and saying, oh crap. But I think that is also true that burdening untrained teachers who are doing loads already and are just nervous and stressed and uncomfortable. Why should we put it on them? It's not fair. It's not sensible. And to be honest, they will. The quality of what the kids get in the class will suffer from that too. So I think a rethink of which teachers or pastoral staff who might not be teachers, teaching assistants, in school, youth workers, whatever they may be. So I'd like to see the end of the industry of parachuting people in. And I used to pay those clients to come into the schools, and I realised I was wasting the school's money. And so what I do is I train staff, but I think teachers are invaluably positioned, but it can't all be them. It's youth service. Our youth service has been decimated in the past 15 years. Where are the young? No young men are studying youth service at university. 2% of early years are men. 15% of primary are men. 16%, and I think it's something like 24% of secondary men. Social work, almost all women. Education psychologists, no men. So actually, I'd rather call that not female dominated, but male abandoned. And I think that's a different way of looking at it. But men's rights acts and say, oh, schools are female dominated, but it'd be like men just won't get involved. That's a different way of thinking about it. So I would say, yeah, policy wise, that's huge. Where are the men in all the key industries and professions where these conversations should be happening? They're not there.
It's educating the men that they need to be involved as well. They don't need to be 15% of the room, which is what it is now. They need to be 50% of the room, and they need to be stepping up as much as everybody else. You know?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, there are whole professions where there are barely any men at all.
No,
Does that have something to do with the salary?
Yeah,
Yeah.
no doubt. No doubt. Certainly in primary, well, early years for sure, nursing, no doubt. And about flexibility around work and all that kinds of stuff. But I think also in probation, which is right, used to be majority male, now it's majority female in the UK. And I was speaking to some probation officers and they were doing some reflection about not being able to recruit men to work with male offenders because it's useful. And they thought it was a change in the language in recruitment. You know, I mean, that will look different in each profession. But the fact is, if we step back and look at 10 crucial professions that would be boy or man facing, they've been abandoned by men. But that gets represented as female dominated by men's rights activists. You know, like a single mum is dominating her family, not like she's been abandoned by the father. You know, it's just a different way of describing reality.
Thank you. Any more questions? I think it's
Why hasn't the UK followed suit? Yeah. Good question. Like, why hasn't it trickled down here? I mean, is it men empowered other perpetrators? And it's not to their advantage? I don't understand why.
Is that one for Kaiser?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would ask you.
A lot of perpetrators, so it's their advantage, you know, child sexual abuse is perpetrated by men in power, have the power to change the law. So,
I'm curious why it came to Ireland first.
For sure.
That I'm interested in.
that's, I'm sure.
Any thoughts on that? I know we're talking about legislation and policy. How can we change that? How can we make a difference?
I think some of those countries are more civic minded than Britain. I think Britain is the original capitalist country in a way, and I think we're deeply used to the commodification of others in a way that some other countries, perhaps in Scandinavia, for example, are not so deeply. It's not so deep in the wool there, perhaps.
I think there's something about the culture of the idea about choice as well. So kind of self-determination being perhaps slightly misunderstood in this context, and everyone's got the freedom and choice and right to be able to sell their body if they wish to, which is then kind of filtered down into a policy environment that is too scared to take a step.
No doubt. I mean, there'll be men here at this conference. There'll be a boom in prostitution in Bournemouth these few days. There's no question about that. There'll be women who've come from all over Britain.
So I think something happens when you start speaking about, you know, women as people and the crimes done to women as crimes. You know, when rape started, you know, being seen as a crime and not just as like an issue between men and women, you know, with, you know, Susan Brown Miller and all these books that came out when they started taking rape seriously. And now it's happening with prostitution, but I also think it needs to happen with porn, because people are speaking about porn as if it's some kind of like societal issue or relationship issue, but you know, there's crimes taking place there. You know, we're speaking about things that if you take away the sex, this would be torture, abuse, I mean, all sorts of things that are illegal, in fact. And then because it's sex, it's like, oh, because it's happening to women, it's not real. And you just need to, you know, like, I mean, I don't know, sometimes you hear things like, yeah, we should look at porn in the classroom and understand that it's not real. Okay, so is that really the way? Because we're talking about crimes here and we're talking about real victims and these victims exist.
Yeah.
So when we formulate it like that, you know, we see it differently. And I've been arguing in my country for, you know, extremely violent porn to be illegal. And they just said, no, but it's the internet. You can't ban anything. It's just the internet. It's just all around. Like, it's just there. And then came the Ukraine war, and all of a sudden, all the Russian sites were gone. And I'm like, oh, so you can't ban the internet, or how was it now? So apparently, it was so easy. It was just like that.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering why all of a sudden, when it comes to women, this is extremely complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So true.
Because nobody really needs to see that.
One more question at the back, and I think then perhaps we ought to start wrapping up.
Thank you, Sarah. I only just thought of this, I've not really thought it through. I'll try. And I'm sorry if I missed it when I briefly stepped out of the room. This conference is over 4 days. On the last day, Tuesday morning, we have a debate, which is selected by ballot this afternoon. 2 debates, actually. One of those will be, it's got a very euphemistic title, Digital Rights, blah, blah, blah. But it's essentially, it's a motion that's come up at short notice because of the application of the Online Safety Act, piece of UK legislation, which was passed a few years ago, we became operative in July. And suddenly there were all these age controls on sites and things like that, for most people they've not been expecting. It just happened 1 week. So I've not analysed it at any great length. I tend to support the online safety bill. I know in our parliament, it was debated over, I think, altogether 6 years. So, you know, it may not be perfect, but it's a good shot at containing quite a few issues that have been bubbling around 5-10 years ago. And it's, for me at least, it's worth trying. You know, we can try it, and if it doesn't work, we'll change it in a few years' time, but we shouldn't cancel anything now. So specifically in relation to the Online Safety Act and the recent backlash, how should we be approaching that, and how should we be voting on Tuesday morning? Thank you very much.
Good question. Who would like to? Yeah, get on. Yeah.
I'm going to take the coward's way out and say that actually I think I haven't made my mind up on this. I think the issues are so complicated, and I think there's so much more that we need to think about before we can get legislation right. And that doesn't mean that we should be at a do nothing point. Obviously something needs to be done, but I think we need to have better conversations very, very quickly before making really clear-cut decisions. And the answer is I don't know.
Fair enough. I think the online the bill was a necessary stopgap, but only the start of the conversation. Also, technology is evolving at such a pace, particularly AI, that it will quickly become redundant. In the same way that I think the Coercive Control Act of 2015, you think what your phone could do 10 years ago. I mean, that really needs a relook, because it's absolutely normal for 13, 14-year-olds to play with each other, to surveil each other. It's usually male to female. And that was not technologically possible 10 years ago. And kids are growing up in families where people love each other and know where everybody is all the time. So it's kind of, these are starting points. And I think the problem is, it's almost like, well, that's dealt with now. But it's not. It's trying to catch a whirlwind in a sense. So, I mean, I don't know about voting. I vote for anything that kept as much porn out of the eyes of children as humanly possible. And I don't really care about men crying about that. So, so I can cry. I don't care at all. Their interests are not my interests. So I'm always with the kids.
Where I am.
Yeah, I don't really care. But they are, you know, present in political parties, of course. Some people even look at porn on the floor of the house.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Kaiser, is there anything that you wanted to?
No, I know nothing about this bill.
No, absolutely. Fair enough. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think we will.
We do have one more, is that all right?
Yeah,
Sorry.
okay, we will have one more question. before
Sorry,
we
it's
go
from
on to
online,
close.
and Helen, do you want to read it from Jill?
It's from Jill online, and I think partly in answer to the question about Ireland. So the 2017 law in Ireland about prostitution was the result of strong advocacy among feminist groups to adopt the Nordic model. And then I think this is a separate point. What do we do about young male teenagers? Referencing the Netflix award-winning drama Adolescence, probably won lots of awards this week. Should this be used as a starting point for discussion and education in schools, as Keir Starmer said?
No. No, it was a disastrous idea of this, which was knee-jerk populist. He should come and do your populist course. No, it's a 4-part drama for adults. It is not school material. It is for adults, about them as adults and parents. It is not a lesson. And the idea, I know hundreds of teachers, all of my family teachers. Everybody I know is a teacher pretty much. Not a single one thought that was a good idea. He didn't ask anybody, he just did it with cameras. No, it's an interesting program, it's got a lot of flaws. And I do hope that the next iteration of it addresses the victim's story and looks at perpetrators who are not all working class. Because I've worked in public schools and there are, quote, pools of rage amongst teenage boys in the highest echelons of society. Can we look at somebody who's not a council-ised dweller once in a lifetime, please?
Any other comments?
Yeah, I think I'd totally agree with what Michael's just said, and I think there is something deeply uncomfortable about the idea about talking about these issues in the classroom with teachers that may not have been trained to manage conversations and where those dynamics may be playing out in real life as well among kids who are either perpetrators or recipients of unwanted behaviour. And I think you've got to manage that kind of conversation and dialogue incredibly carefully, and it's not a Netflix drama that can spark that conversation appropriately.
Yeah, I just have one last book recommendation now that you were mentioning Ireland, because I was touring with a fantastic activist and prostitution survivor from Ireland, Rachel Moore. So if you haven't read her book, paid for, it's great. Like, it's so great because she speaks about her experience in prostitution, but also about how she interprets what happens and what she feels, so it's not a straight up biography, it's much more than that. It's a great read. So I think she might have played a big role in changing Irish politics.
Thank you. Thank you ever so much, everybody. Just to finish, I just wanted to say that last month, the Children's Commissioner for the UK published a stark report on children and pornography entitled Sex is Kind of Broken Now. The report says that a society is judged by how it protects its children. So I'm going to leave everybody on that last point. But before I say goodnight, I would like, in the usual way, please, to thank our absolutely fantastic speakers and yourselves, of course, for being a really good audience and a great discussion. Thank you so much.